Now, this is we've completed this para about the types of muscles, okay, which are derived from the types of mesoderms, okay. Skeletal from paraxial, cardiac and smooth are derived from the visceral mesoderm, which is actually a subtype of the lateral plate mesoderm. Now, let's look at these diagrams over here. Let me zoom out a bit. Now, these four diagrams have been taken from your book Langman. Okay, if you look at the first diagram over here, you've got the midline, the notochord or the midline, okay, and now next to the midline, you've got the mesoderm developing. Okay, the mesoderm is developing next to the midline. This mesoderm that's developing, it proliferates. Okay, initially this a mesenchymal tissue it develops over here. Okay, mesenchymal mesodermal tissue, the mesenchymal tissue of the mesoderm develops right next to it. Mesenchymal tissue is actually the connective tissue of the embryo. Okay, now the mesoderm it proliferates, and the region which is right in adjacent to the midline it thickens. Okay, it becomes a bit thicker. This thickened region is the paraxial mesoderm. Okay, and I told you the meaning of paraxial. Para means parallel and axial means midline, so the mesoderm that is parallel to the midline. At the same time, if you look at the edges over here at the lateral sides they remain thin. Okay, they do not thicken. The lateral sides remain thin, but only the medial sides or the adjacent sides of the middle line they thicken. This thin mesoderm on the lateral sides is known as the lateral plate mesoderm. Lateral plate mesoderm. We did this this subtype right over here, the lateral plate mesoderm. Okay, so the lateral plate mesoderm is actually present on the sides of the embryo, on the lateral sides of the embryo. And now the intermediate mesoderm is actually present in a region that connects the paraxial mesoderm with the lateral plate mesoderm. Okay, the mesoderm which is present in the middle of these two is the intermediate mesoderm, which is actually more prominent right over here in this region, in this diagram. Okay, this is your okay, just ignore this word somite for now. Okay, I'll explain it in a bit. But this is the paraxial mesoderm. This is where the paraxial mesoderm was present, and this region over here, this red line, this red boundary, this is the lateral plate mesoderm, and the line that connects these two types of mesoderm, this blue shading over here that I just shaded, this is the intermediate mesoderm, which is also labeled over here. Okay, so that's the labeling on the diagram of the three types of mesoderms. Now, what really happens over here is that initially this mesenchymal tissue it develops right next to the midline. Then later on, the lateral plate mesoderm, in the lateral plate mesoderm, as you can see, it's written, it's labeled over here in the diagram, that the intercellular cavities develop. Okay, or intercellular cavities they appear in the lateral plate mesoderm. Okay, if these intercellular cavities they then join together and form a large groove or a large space or a large cavity. Okay, they eventually, these small cavities they join together and form a larger cavity which divides the lateral plate mesoderm into two parts. Okay, the upper part that surrounds the entire amniotic cavity, okay, and the lower part that surrounds the entire yolk sac. Okay, you can appreciate the same thing over here in this diagram. This lower part that surrounds the yolk sac and the upper part that surrounds the amniotic cavity. These are the two divisions of the lateral plate mesoderm. Now the upper part which surrounds the entire amniotic cavity is known as the parietal or the somatic mesoderm. Somatic mesoderm or the parietal mesoderm. Whereas the lower part that surrounds the yolk sac is known as the splanchnic mesoderm or the visceral mesoderm. So see how the classification is now uh, coming together. Okay, so we first started out from the mesoderm. It had the three types: the paraxial, intermediate, and lateral plate mesoderm. Okay, so this is the paraxial mesoderm, then there is an intermediate mesoderm, and then there is the lateral plate mesoderm. The lateral plate mesoderm, this one, it then divides into two types by the cavities that have appeared in the lateral plate mesoderm. The cavities join together and form a larger cavity, and this larger cavity then uh, divides the lateral plate mesoderm into two parts. Okay, and these two parts, they surround the amniotic cavity and the yolk sac. When they surround the amniotic cavity, they are known as, this mesoderm is known as the somatic or the parietal mesoderm, and when it surrounds the yolk sac, it's known as the splanchnic mesoderm. Now, the splanchnic mesoderm is what I just told you. It forms the cardiac and the smooth muscles. Okay, and the splanchnic mesoderm forms the cardiac and the smooth muscles, whereas the somatic mesoderm, it forms the muscles of the body wall and the limbs. Okay, so this was about the uh, lateral plate mesoderm and the paraxial mesoderm. Okay, and their derivatives. And I've written all of this explanation down in these paragraphs as well, so let's read through them quickly. Okay, so initially the mesodermal cells, they form a thin sheet of mesenchymal tissue on both the sides of the midline. Okay, it's shown right over here. Okay, initially there is this mesenchymal tissue right next to the midline. Okay, then what happens, the mesenchymal tissue, it proliferates around the 17th day. Okay, it starts proliferating, and both the adjacent sides of the midline, they become thickened and form the paraxial mesoderm. Okay, and yeah, and I told you what the paraxial mesoderm was, right parallel to the midline and forms the skeletal muscles. Okay, what other mesoderm forms the skeletal muscles or have a role in forming the muscles of the limbs or the skeleton? It's actually the somatic mesoderm. Okay, so both the somatic mesoderm and the paraxial mesoderm, but mainly the paraxial mesoderm, form the skeletal muscles. Okay, and then if we move on the lateral ends, okay, then we talk about the lateral plate mesoderm. Cavities, they appear over here. These cavities divided into the parietal mesoderm and the visceral mesoderm. The parietal mesoderm, the mesodermal tissue stays thin and forms, okay, initially it stays thin over here. Okay, and then it is called the lateral plate mesoderm, but then cavities, they appear over here. And then, okay, where did the diagram go? Okay, it's back now. So cavities appear. Then the third part of the mesoderm, called the intermediate mesoderm, it joins these two types of mesoderms or connects them. Okay, the intermediate mesoderm don't have such a significant role right now, but its major role is to connect. It doesn't have a significant role, but its major role is just connecting these two types of mesoderms right now. Then the third part of mesoderm is the intermediate mesoderm, which connects. Okay, we've talked about that one. Then lateral plate mesoderm continues to surround the amniotic and yolk sac. And then the part surrounding the amniotic cavity is the somatic mesoderm and the splanchnic mesoderm. Okay, it forms the body walls of the limbs. And the part that surrounds the yolk sac is called the splanchnic mesoderm or the visceral mesoderm, and it is derived to form the smooth muscles and the cardiac muscle. And we've discussed all of this in great detail just now, right?